Let's jump in. I just want to do MVP. Let's just tear the Band-Aid off, right? Let's do it. Let's talk about this. Let's get it done. Okay. Rank 5. Schindler, who are the guys you have in 5th and 4th?
Fifth for me is probably Jason Tatum right now. Just because, like, obviously his start to the year was so tremendous. Is obviously I don't think falling off feels unfair. I think you keep hearing like, oh, the Celtics have fallen off, but then you look at what they've done since the All-Star break, and they've still been really tremendous. Obviously, just not the same like 20-3 stretch they had at the beginning of the year. But I would have JT fifth right now. Fourth for me, I've kind of gone back and forth on this one. I feel like there's just such a big drop off. Probably have Luka around here. Like he's been really good. I don't think that he's been nearly as MVP worthy as I think it's quite gotten propped up to be. But what he's done with his as an individual in lifting that team to what they are right now has been pretty remarkable. Looking at it as a whole.
I get it. I did not have Luka in my top 5. I could not get there, and I think people will be surprised. I don't have Luka as a first-team All-NBA guy this year. The way the Mavs fell off at the end of the year, I just couldn't get there. I could not get there. All due respect to Luka, I think that he will be a first-team All-NBA guy for many years to come. I just couldn't quite get there this year in this mess of a season for the Mavericks where everything fell apart so poorly. My 5th place is a tie between Donovan Mitchell and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And just because I feel like the way that Mitchell has transformed the Cavs offensively has led to them really actually genuinely rising up the ranks of teams across the league. Not to say that Shai's leap has not led to Oklahoma City really spiking up the board here recently, but the Cavs won 51 games this year. They had the second best net rating in the entire NBA. They had a top 10 offensive rating in the entire NBA. That is a credit to, first and foremost, in my opinion, Donovan Mitchell. I think Donovan Mitchell has been absolutely spectacular this season. 28 points per game, 48 field goal percentage, 39% from 3, 87% from the line. He's gotten much better in terms of his efficiency at the basket, his sequencing, his steps, his footwork. It's gotten drastically better. In terms of being able to create offense efficiently for himself. I also think that playing with Darius Garland, just a little bit more explosive than Mike Conley was at this stage of his career in Utah, has really unlocked and unleashed a lot of what Mitchell can do. And I think Darius Garland was like someone I very strongly considered on the outskirts of the All-NBA conversation. I didn't quite get there with him, but I think Darius Garland has been absolutely tremendous this season and is worthy of very real high-level discussion in that regard. I went with Mitchell at 5, but it was like 5A, 5B with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who I think has been absolutely phenomenal this season. His ability to just pressure the basket in such a substantial way is unlike anything right now in the NBA from the guard position. Number 4 for me was Jason Tatum. This team won 57 games. They've been absolutely outstanding this season. You just kind of look at the way this team operates, it so revolves around what Tatum can do offensively. They have a lot of great floor spacers around the court. Malcolm Brogdon shot 44% from 3. We'll talk about him later. Derek White shot 38% from 3. Al Horford, 44% from 3. Grant Williams, 40% from 3. But it feels like their shot creation is so reliant upon what he and Jaylen Brown can do. And I think that Jaylen, frankly, like, I don't know if enough people like noticed it felt like his like efficiency kind of dropped off more than Tatum's did, more than anything throughout the course of the season. And he had big moments. He had really important moments for the Celtics, but I think Tatum is the guy that makes everything go there. I had Tatum at number 4.
Yeah, I do want to say though, one of the things that was really fun to watch about Jaylen, not that he took some massive leap, but I do think he just got a little bit more comfortable as a playmaker, as a downhill driver, specifically in March when they really needed him to. That's been fun to watch. Again, not that I think he's ready to be a primary usage type player, but seeing him take on more of that role was cool. I know, obviously not considering him MVP, we're just going off that.
Yeah. No, of course. We'll talk about him probably during the All-NBA discussion in some regard, at least.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you want to go 1-3 or do you want to go 3-1 for MVP?
Let's go 3-1.
Okay. So actually, sorry, I'm going to overrule you here. I kind of want to go 1-3.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I'm an asshole. I asked you the question and then ignored you. That's my fault. The reason I want to go 1-3 is because I want to open this because I just want to take the brunt of all this that's going to happen here. I picked Giannis Antetokounmpo for MVP. Who do you have for MVP, Mark?
I picked Joel as MVP.
Okay. I went back and forth between Joel and Giannis up until 30 minutes before we started recording. Like, I dove into everything that I possibly could with these two. And ultimately what I kind of came down to with these two is I just want to say, like, in terms of minutes played, all of these guys are over 2,000 minutes. All of them are within 300 minutes played of one another. They're all within the same ballpark in terms of games played. I'm good just personally considering these guys on the merits. That won't necessarily be the case with all of the awards, as we'll talk about with Defensive Player of the Year in all likelihood, because I think there is a real gap in terms of minutes played there for one player. In this case, I was willing to go fully just on the merits of the dude that I think is the best. Mark, did you kind of operate in a similar way?
Yeah. I wound up, well, like you just mentioned, I had Joel first. I had Giannis second, and I jostled with Giannis for one. But I think with how good Joel has been just since the start of the new year, pretty much, which is weird to say new year now, 4 months in, which is crazy to me. But I just think Joel has been the best player in the NBA over the last 40 games, while having been, top 2 for the first 40. So obviously he's missed some of that too. But then looking into it, he's played a little bit more. That doesn't matter for me. It's a 3-game difference. I just thought, in terms of looking at heavy lifting and how important he's been for what the Sixers have done, well, also, like, I don't think that leading the league in scoring matters too much to me, but it's still a factor in it. So, and then looking at it too, I think our friend Nikias Duncan brought up a really great point on the dunker spot in talking about how Joel actually has like a really good case for clutch player of the year. With what he does, I agree defensively. With this. And there's one thing I just want to frame. I feel like, and this is not me going against any of my friends or anybody who thinks this way, but I think clutch play really does matter to me. I get that it can be wonky, especially if you're looking just at shooting splits, but it's what happened. Like, I'm not trying to just negate things, but I don't love just chalking everything up to, well, this could just be such a big thing on shooting variance. I'm like, well, I don't care. It's what happened. So I'm going to use it as an example that I care about. Joel's been incredible in crunch time on both ends of the ball. Like, the way that he just absolutely takes over games defensively in final minutes has been unreal. I mean, he's obviously always been, pretty much since he's been in the NBA, a near dominant scorer, but him at the elbow this year off the catch has just been practically unguardable. And so for me, when I look back on this season, and so much of it's going to be remembering Joel for what he did on national TV and moments against other MVPs, and just on a nightly basis, he's my MVP.
Yeah, I think that's a completely reasonable case. I think that's an entirely reasonable case where, honestly, again, like, I'm basically there. It's just that I went with Giannis, and here is kind of my breakdown on how I went through MVP. So Giannis has the best winning percentage, play for the best team this year. He has the best winning percentage of any of these guys when they're on the court and when they play, right? Joel averaged the most points per possession played. Joel's team, a thing that's been a talking point is Joel's team had a higher winning percentage when he didn't play versus like when he didn't play, right? Or versus when he did play. I don't really care about that in this conversation. I think that's really silly. If you look at the team's schedule, like, there's a couple of late season games against Brooklyn. There's a lot of like Charlotte, Orlando, things like that. You would expect the team with like James Harden, Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris to beat some of the teams that, they sat Joel against, in all likelihood strategically, in order to conserve him while still being able to get minutes and still being able to rack wins. So I can't personally hold that against Joel in this conversation. What I will say is this. Joel led the league in scoring. I went through and calculated essentially points created per game via like point and assist, right? This season, Nikola Jokic averaged 24 and a half points via his own scoring, 24 points via assist. Giannis 30 or 25 and a half, I think it was. Giannis 31.1 points per game via his own scoring, 15.1 via assists. Joel 33.1 via his own scoring, 11, or I think it was 10.8 via his assists. So if you look at points created per game, Jokic leads these three guys at 49. Giannis is at 46.2, Embiid 43.9. Now, I actually calculated it per 100 possessions. And you do this essentially by calculating the amount of points that each player derives per assist, then doing, assists per 100 possessions, right? So it's an estimate, but it's essentially going to be right. This season, per 100 possessions, Jokic derived 69.4 points per points and assist. Giannis, 66.4. Embiid, 62.3. So Embiid is actually, like, from a volume perspective in terms of deriving offense, the least voluminous, let's say, in terms of this. So now comes the efficiency factor. Jokic's efficiency is like off the charts, right? Like, let's just be clear about that. And I think there's real value that goes beyond the stat sheet in terms of the unselfishness that he plays with. Joel, I think, has a really great situation offensively around him. Tyrese Maxey, James Harden, two-man game with James Harden, everything like that. Giannis is the least efficient of these guys this season. He has something like a 60.5 true shooting percentage. I think that there is a reason for that. First and foremost, free throws. Like, he should make his free throws. I think he's shooting like 64% from the line this year. The second reason, though, is that he played a lot of the early season up until like the midway point without Chris Middleton and partially without, Drew Holiday at times as well throughout the season. And when those two are off the court, Giannis is like relied upon for everything. And teams not just like double Giannis, they throw the kitchen sink at this dude to try and slow him down. And they hack the shit out of him. They foul him. They try and make it so points are harder. And in Giannis's case, it's a real demerit to him, in my opinion, that he doesn't make his free throws in those circumstances. Giannis would win this award going away if he was an 80% free throw shooter. I don't even think it would be all that close, to be honest. Because you look at the numbers that he would put up, it'd be like 3 extra points per game or 2 extra points per game. He'd be like essentially equal or above Joel in scoring. He'd be better than Joel assists. He'd be better in rebounding. He'd be better as a defender. Like, you'd look at it across the board and you'd be like, okay, like, this is not even a conversation. It's a genuine demerit for Giannis that he is not a good free throw shooter and thus puts himself in these disadvantageous situations at the foul line by teams hacking him. I do think, though, that the lack of shot creation around Giannis for a large swath of the season led to that inefficiency, led to that difficulty for him in terms of turnovers at times where guys just like dig down onto him. Like, he's getting triple teamed a lot of the time, it feels like, even more often than someone like Joel is, and especially more often than someone like Jokic is, where, and again, Jokic is so good that you can't double him. Like, that is part of his game. He is such an elite passer and processor of the game that you actually can't. If you double him, it's over. He'll find the open man, period. I think that's a credit to Jokic that you can't double him. I struggle just in terms of the fact that I think Giannis is probably 5 points per game better defensively. I do. I think Giannis is 5 or 6 points per game better defensively than Jokic. And that makes up for the efficiency gap. It makes up for the volume gap in terms of the amount of points they're creating. And I just have to have Giannis ahead of Jokic. And then you look at Giannis versus Embiid. To me, the efficiency, there's a gap, but I think the gap is smaller than people think given the situation around them. Giannis derives more points off of passing and his own scoring than Joel Embiid does. And in my opinion, Giannis is a better defender than Joel is. So putting all of that together with all of this, I had to go with Giannis. The other part of this for me is very simple. Who do I think is the best player in the league? Like, if I made you say, who do you think is the best player in the NBA right now, Mark, who would you say?
I would say it's been Joel, which is why I go
Okay.
MVP. But I think
this is great.
I think it's
yes,
I think it's been between him and Giannis over the last month and a half, 2 months.
And I think that's great. Like, if you want to make that case for Joel, I think that's awesome. And I think it's completely reasonable. And I think that there is like a real rational, cogent argument to make there. I think it's Giannis. I think Giannis is the best two-way force in the league. I think he is the best force at creating offense outside of passing. Like, look, all told, that's a bad way to phrase it, I guess. He's not the best. Jokic is the best offensive force in the league. I think Giannis is the best two-way force in the league, is what I would say. And I think we've seen it for the last 3 years, 5 years even, really, that Giannis has been the best player in the league. 2 MVPs, NBA title. Again, I would have voted for him for MVP last year. I had this conversation with Matt Moore last year on the show. You can go back and listen. I said I would have voted for Giannis. He was the best player in the league, in my opinion, last year. He's the best player in the league this year. And you look at their team record, you look at their record when he's on the court. I just kind of have to do it. I have to go with Giannis at MVP.
Yeah, I can't debate that. I think that I'm totally reasonable with that. The only thing I'd add is, for me, Jokic kind of removed himself from this equation with how Denver's played over the last month. With how, not that he's been bad, like, obviously we're talking relatively. I'm sure somebody's going to say that I'm talking out of my ass. That's fine. I just don't think that he's played to the same standard that he did last year. I think the defense has been particularly abysmal and difficult to watch. And that matters. Like, I can't overlook that when we're looking at this right now. If the scoring volume was the same as it was last year, I think I'd be willing to look at it a little bit differently. But it's not even that he's that different from last year. It's just, it's not the same. And I don't think it's the same as what Joel and Giannis are doing. So I have him third. There.
Yeah. So with Jokic, I pulled some defensive numbers, obviously. I mean, Denver this year, they're 15th in defense overall, right? If you look at their defense against top 10 offenses per cleaning the glass, they're 21st. Milwaukee's the best against top 10 offenses. Philly's 11th. Denver also is the 18th defense, or is 18th in defense versus the top 20 teams in the NBA in terms of point differential. I don't know how I pulled that number. I'm sorry for however I found it. Overall, Denver is 31-22 this year versus top 20 teams in the NBA. Milwaukee this year is 35-19. Philadelphia is 32-20. So Denver this year against top 20 teams in the league. So I did top 20 because cleaning the glass has top 10, middle 10, bottom 10. So I basically just filtered out the bottom 10 teams in the league. But also that lines up perfectly with the amount of teams that make the play-in the playoffs. So basically against play-in or playoff teams, it's not exact because point differential is a little bit different there. Denver has the worst record of these 3 teams, despite the fact that, I think they have a great supporting cast that particularly accentuates what Nikola Jokic does. Jamal Murray is an incredible scorer. Michael Porter Jr. is arguably the best spot-up threat in the league. Aaron Gordon accentuates every single skill that Nikola Jokic doesn't have by being great at those things. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope was a great defensive addition for this group that I think was necessary. Bruce Brown, had a great first half of the season at the very least, and really was quite strong throughout the year. Ultimately, I think that Embiid is a significant force of their issues defensively this season. And look, I actually think part of this is Michael Malone continuing to play dropped coverage later in the season for reasons that like kind of went beyond my comprehension. I think kind of hung Jokic out to dry a little bit. He's not really great in drop coverage. I would imagine that, again, it was probably a situation where they're trying to conserve Jokic's energy, but the result is what matters here. And the result was that Jokic was pretty poor defensively through the final third of the season. And it becomes really tricky to kind of parse through all of that context, in my opinion. But for me, Jokic was clearly third. And then it was a toss-up between Embiid and Giannis. I went with Giannis for reasons that I explained. And you went with Joel for reasons you explained. And I think either vote is completely reasonable. Like, if you want to vote for either of those guys, I am 100% for it. Like, you will not hear me argue. You will not hear me complain. You will not hear a word out of me if you want to vote for either of those two. I mean, like, I have a person in the YouTube comments saying that Jokic plays with worse teammates. I think I, personally would disagree, especially given how much time Chris Middleton missed this year. Like, Chris Middleton was not valuable this year up until the final, I don't know, Mark, what would you say, 20 games realistically?
Like right around there. And also too, and this is not me just trying to dunk on you in the comments, but net rating is not an individual stat, and I think that's more indicative of how bad Denver's bench has been than how. I mean, as part of it is saying how awesome Jokic has been, but their bench has just gotten torched all year. So when he's off, it's going to look a lot worse. And again, I'm not trying to just cape for others. I think it's fine to vote for Jokic. I've gotten a lot less more open to Jokic as the MVP winner over the last month. But yeah. And I mean, I'm with you. I wouldn't agree that his teammates are worse.
Yeah, no. Given, I think in a vacuum, or like if all teams are equal on equal footing and equal pegging, then you could certainly make a case that when Milwaukee has Middleton, that Milwaukee has like the best core four in the NBA, right? But Kentavious Caldwell-Pope played 76 games this year. Aaron Gordon played 68, Michael Porter 62, Bruce Brown 80, Jamal Murray 65 around him. And then you look at Milwaukee, Chris Middleton again. I think Middleton probably played like 33 games, and those first 10 were pretty rough. Brook Lopez played 78, Drew Holiday played 67. Grayson Allen and Bobby Portis are the next guys here, right? Like, I don't really think you can make a case that that the Milwaukee supporting cast this year in totality in terms of who all played is better than the Denver supporting cast. All due respect to Milwaukee, again, once Middleton is there, I think they take a real step above that. But yeah, I mean, look, like, Jamal Murray's an all-star. I think Aaron Gordon was like the 13th man on the all-star team this year. Michael Porter Jr. again is like unbelievable. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is awesome. It's the depth of starting crew that plays with Jokic for the majority of the minutes that really gives him, I think, the edge in this conversation. It'd be a different conversation if Chris Middleton played more than 20 games at full health this year. But yeah, I think the reality is that. Okay. 1, Giannis, 2, Joel, 3, Jokic, 4, Tatum, 5, Donovan Mitchell for me. Mark.
I'm trying to remember how I even had it because I never written down. Yeah, obviously, yeah. Joel, Giannis, Jokic, Tatum, Jesus, and then Luka.
You had Luka 4.
Or it was Luka, and then Tatum.